Imagine trusting your best friend with everything, only to wake up one day and realize he's stolen your wife. That's exactly what happened to me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I never thought anything like this could happen. My name is Ethan Parker, and I've always believed in the strength of family and friendship. I've been happily married to Lila for 5 years, and life seemed perfect. Lila is kind, caring, and the one person who has always supported me through everything. She's not just my wife, she's my partner in every sense. Then there's Derek Malone. Derek and I have been friends since childhood. We shared everything, games, secrets, dreams, and even fears. I trusted him with my life. He was practically my brother. At first, everything seemed normal. Derek would visit us, and we'd laugh like nothing had changed. But slowly, I started noticing little things. Small comments that didn't sit right with me, jokes that seemed to have a hidden meaning. He would linger a little too long when talking to Lila, and sometimes I'd catch him staring, as if he wanted something more than friendship. I shrugged it off, thinking I was imagining things. I trusted him, and I trusted Lila. I didn't want to see any danger in what seemed like innocent moments. I would come home after work, expecting to see my loving wife and my best friend hanging out casually, sharing a laugh or a meal. And most of the time, that's exactly what happened. But the little signs were there. Derek's laughter sometimes sounded forced, too sharp, too personal. He found excuses to spend time alone with Lila, like helping her with household things or offering to take her out for errands. I never questioned it. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, Derek has always been loyal, right? He's my friend. And Lila, she would never do anything to hurt me. That's what I told myself every time doubt crept in. I started noticing the way Derek would compliment Lila in subtle ways, commenting on her looks or praising her ideas in a way that felt too personal. It made me uneasy, but I chose to ignore it. I focused on work and our home life, trying to maintain the peace I believed was unbreakable. I was blind, not because I didn't see, but because I refused to see. My trust in both of them blinded me to what was slowly taking shape right in front of my eyes. Looking back, the signs were clear, but I was too caught up in loyalty and love to notice. Everything seemed perfect on the surface, but underneath, something was shifting. Little moments, small gestures, and subtle glances were starting to hint at a betrayal I never imagined possible. And I had no idea that my perfect life was about to be shattered in a way I would never forget. After months of small signs and uneasy feelings, Derek started finding more ways to spend time alone with Lila. At first, it seemed harmless. He would offer to help with errands, pick up groceries, or fix things around the house. He made it look like he was just being a helpful friend. I wanted to believe it. I told myself that he and Lila were just spending time together because they cared about me and the house, not because anything was wrong. I still trusted both of them completely. But little by little, tension started building. I noticed Lila acting differently around him sometimes. She would laugh a little too much at his jokes or smile when he said things I didn't understand. Derek's presence began to feel heavier, almost like a shadow in my home. I kept thinking maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was overreacting. After all, Derek was my best friend, and Lila was my loving wife. How could I doubt them? One evening, I came home earlier than usual. I had finished work sooner than expected and wanted to surprise Lila with dinner. As I walked in quietly, I noticed the living room lights were dim, and there was a soft sound of voices. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming they were talking normally. But as I got closer, my heart froze. There they were, Derek and Lila, sitting close together on the couch. Their hands were intertwined, and their heads were leaning toward each other in a way that wasn't friendly. They were sharing a private moment, something intimate, something I never imagined would happen between them. Time seemed to stop. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind refused to accept it at first. Shock hit me like a heavy weight, leaving me frozen in place. I couldn't breathe properly. All the small signs I had dismissed suddenly made sense. Every lingering glance, every forced laugh, every excuse to spend time together, it had all been leading to this moment. The betrayal wasn't just there, it was undeniable. A deep heartbreak sank into my chest. The people I had trusted most in the world, my wife and my best friend, had turned against me. I felt disbelief mixed with anger and sadness that I couldn't even begin to process. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my relationships, and my home suddenly felt like it had been built on lies. I had no words. I had no reaction. I just stood there, watching in silence, as the reality of what had happened hit me harder than anything else ever could. In that moment, I realized that my life had changed forever. The trust one had given so freely had been broken in the worst way possible. And for the first time, I understood that some betrayals leave scars that never truly heal. After that night, I couldn't face Derek or Lila. I stopped answering their calls and avoided places I knew they would be. The house, once full of laughter and comfort, felt cold and empty. I spent hours alone, replaying everything in my mind. I questioned myself constantly, had I missed the signs? Could I have done something differently? The guilt, even though it wasn't mine to bear, weighed heavily on me. I stopped trusting my own judgment. Every memory I had with them suddenly felt tainted. Every joke, every shared secret, every friendly gesture from Derek now seemed suspicious in hindsight. It was hard to believe that the people I loved most could betray me so completely. Nights were the worst. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a deep emptiness, like a part of me had been ripped away. I had lost not just a wife and a friend, but the sense of safety I had in my own life. Meanwhile, Derek started acting differently around me. He didn't confront me openly, but I could see the way he subtly flaunted his new relationship with Lila. He would mention small things in passing, like going out to dinner with her or planning weekend trips. It was never direct, but it felt like a taunt, a reminder that he had taken what was mine. Every word, every casual mention, was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I found myself thinking back to the years of friendship I had with Derek, and it hurt more than anything else. I remembered the trust, the loyalty, the countless times we had promised to be there for each other. All of it felt meaningless now. My marriage, which I had cherished and believed was unbreakable, seemed fragile in comparison. Lila, the woman I had loved with all my heart, had chosen someone else in a moment of weakness, leaving me completely blindsided. The emotional pain was raw, sharp, and constant. For days, I withdrew even further. I stopped socializing, stopped laughing, stopped caring about things that used to bring me joy. I walked through life like a shadow, going through the motions but feeling nothing inside. Every reminder of them, photos, shared spaces, even old messages, triggered waves of grief and anger. I felt trapped in a cycle of sadness and disbelief, unable to escape the weight of betrayal. During this time, I realized something important. Betrayal doesn't just hurt in the moment, it lingers, it changes you, and it forces you to see the people you trusted in a completely new light. Lila's betrayal was not just a shock, it was a lesson in the fragility of trust and the harsh reality that the people we love can sometimes hurt us the most. After weeks of pain and isolation, I realized that acting out of anger wouldn't help me. Screaming, confronting them, or lashing out would only make me feel worse. I needed a plan, a quiet, careful way to take back control and make sure Derek and Lila understood the consequences of their actions. I decided that my revenge wouldn't be loud or reckless. It had to be strategic, precise, and most importantly, smart. I started by observing Derek carefully. I looked at his daily routines, the way he worked, and how he handled money and relationships. I noticed the habits he thought no one paid attention to, the small shortcuts he took at work, the debts he ignored, the people he had taken for granted. I learned his weaknesses, the cracks in the confident image he always showed to the world. I took mental notes, knowing that these details would become tools later. At the same time, I began working on myself. I started exercising again, pushing my body and mind to become stronger. I focused on my career, taking on new responsibilities and building a reputation I had almost let slide during my grief. I also reached out to friends I had drifted away from, strengthening connections that reminded me I wasn't alone. Every small improvement gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. The changes weren't just physical or professional. I started carrying myself differently, confident, calm, and composed. I didn't let anger show on my face. I spoke clearly, smiled genuinely, and showed that I wasn't broken anymore. Lila noticed it first. She began looking at me with a mixture of surprise and something else, regret, maybe, or the realization that I was no longer the man she had hurt so easily. Derek noticed too, though he tried to hide it. The energy had shifted, and I could feel it in every interaction. As I strengthened myself, I also thought through the steps I would take to make Derek feel the consequences of his betrayal. It wasn't about hurting him physically or publicly shaming him. It was about showing him what he had lost and how his choices affected everyone around him. I wanted him to see that loyalty, trust, and respect weren't things he could take lightly. Through all of this, I reminded myself to stay patient. True revenge doesn't come from anger, it comes from timing, planning, and confidence. The more I focused on myself and my strategy, the clearer everything became. I wasn't just recovering from the betrayal, I was becoming someone stronger, smarter, and more resilient. Derek and Lila had set a fire in my life, but instead of burning me down, it had made me rise. And soon, they would see the results of that rise in ways they never expected. When the time felt right, I made my first move. I didn't rush it, and I didn't make it obvious. I simply started telling the truth in the right places. Derek had built his image on trust, reliability, and charm, especially around his business partners and shared friends. I knew that if that image cracked, everything else would follow. So I let people see the side of him he had worked so hard to hide. I shared small but important details about his dishonest habits, things he had brushed off for years. I didn't exaggerate or accuse him emotionally. I stayed calm and factual. I talked about missed commitments, questionable decisions, and promises he had quietly broken. Once people started paying attention, they noticed things on their own. Conversations changed. Meetings felt tense. Derek was no longer treated like the dependable man everyone admired. Slowly, his credibility began to fall apart. Business partners started questioning his decisions. Friends became distant and cautious. Invitations stopped coming as often. People listened to him less and trusted him even less. Nothing dramatic happened overnight, but the damage was steady and undeniable. Derek could feel it, even if he didn't say it out loud. Throughout all of this, I stayed calm. I didn't celebrate publicly or act proud. I kept my emotions under control and let events unfold naturally. Inside, though, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not joy, but balance. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like things were shifting back into place. Every small setback Derek faced reminded me that actions have consequences, even when they're hidden for a long time. Derek tried to act like nothing was wrong, but the pressure was getting to him. His confidence started to crack. He spoke less, hesitated more, and seemed unsure of himself in situations where he used to dominate the room. People noticed the change. Respect, once lost, is hard to regain, and Derek was learning that the hard way. The emotional tension kept building. I could sense his frustration growing while I stayed composed and focused. My silence unsettled him more than anger ever could. He didn't know what I knew or how far I was willing to go. That uncertainty became my strength. This was only the beginning. I wasn't destroying his life, I was letting the truth do its job. Step by step, piece by piece, the mask he wore was falling. And as I watched his world start to shake, I understood something clearly. Revenge doesn't always need loud words or dramatic scenes. Sometimes, the smartest revenge is simply allowing someone to face the consequences of who they truly are. As Derek's world started slipping out of his control, I made sure to stay in the background. I didn't confront him or warn him. Instead, I let small things happen, things that seemed like accidents but slowly disrupted his life. Important files went missing at the wrong time. Meetings were forgotten. Appointments were mixed up. Nothing big enough to cause suspicion on its own, but together, they created chaos. Derek was used to everything going his way, and now nothing seemed to work anymore. I watched from a distance as his confidence faded. He started showing up late, unprepared, and frustrated. People around him noticed. The same man who once walked with pride now looked tense and distracted. His voice lost its certainty. His hands shook when things didn't go as planned. The arrogance he once carried so easily was turning into stress and panic. At home, things weren't any better for him. Under pressure, Derek began blaming Lila for his problems. Small disagreements turned into heated arguments. The relationship he thought was perfect started cracking under the weight of his failures. He accused her of distracting him, of being the reason his life was falling apart. The love that brought them together was quickly being replaced by resentment and fear. Lila tried to hold things together, but Derek's frustration made it impossible. He was no longer the confident man she thought she had chosen. He was insecure, angry, and constantly afraid of losing more than he already had. Their home became filled with tension instead of comfort. Every mistake pushed them further apart, and neither of them knew how to fix it. I stayed silent through all of this. I didn't step in or interfere directly. I let the consequences unfold naturally. Watching Derek struggle wasn't about pleasure, it was about justice. He had taken something precious from me without guilt, and now he was facing the emotional cost of his actions. The fear in his eyes said more than any apology ever could. As his plans fell apart one by one, regret began to show. He questioned his choices, his decisions, and the person he had become. The man who once believed he could take whatever he wanted was now learning that betrayal always comes with a price. In the end, I understood something important. Emotional retribution doesn't always come through confrontation. Sometimes, it comes quietly, through loss, fear, and regret. Derek wasn't just losing control of his life, he was losing himself. And I didn't have to do much at all. I simply stepped aside and let his own actions finish the work he had started. As Derek's life continued to unravel, Lila started noticing things she hadn't before. The man she had once admired seemed smaller, weaker, and constantly stressed. The arrogance that had drawn her to him now looked selfish and careless. Arguments, missed commitments, and his constant blaming made her start questioning her own choices. Slowly, she began to realize the truth: leaving Ethan had been a mistake. She remembered the years with Ethan, the support, the trust, the quiet love that had always been there. Compared to that, Derek's promises and gestures now felt empty. The charm she had once thought irresistible now seemed hollow, and the life she had imagined with him began to feel like a mistake she could no longer ignore. Every small failure Derek made, every harsh word, every selfish act, reminded her of what she had lost when she betrayed Ethan. Derek noticed the change in her. For the first time, he became desperate. He started pleading for forgiveness, trying to convince her that things could be fixed. He apologized endlessly, offering words he had never meant before. He begged her to stay, promising he would change, promising he would be better. But the trust they had lost was gone. Words alone could not rebuild what had already been broken. Meanwhile, I stayed calm. I did not confront them. I did not yell or make scenes. I had grown stronger through all of this. The pain and betrayal had taught me patience, and I carried myself with dignity. I focused on living my life, on being the man I had always wanted to be. Every time I saw Lila pause, think, or hesitate with Derek, I felt the quiet strength of having endured the worst and come out stronger. I had reclaimed my control, not through anger, but through patience, growth, and self-respect. The tension between them became obvious. Derek's desperation could not fix the mistakes he had made, and Lila's regret only highlighted the depth of their loss. She began seeing him for who he truly was, not the version she wanted to believe in. Derek's panic grew as he realized he could not undo the damage, and I watched from a distance, knowing that life was finally balancing the scales. There was a strange sense of catharsis in seeing it unfold. Betrayal had been met with consequence, arrogance had been met with failure, and selfishness had been met with regret. Lila's realization was not just about leaving Derek, it was about understanding the value of honesty, loyalty, and true love. And I remained steady, confident, and unshaken, having risen above the pain, proving that strength and patience are far more powerful than anger and revenge. It was a turning point. The loss Derek suffered mirrored the betrayal he had caused. The man who had taken so much now faced the emptiness of his own choices, while I stood firm, calm, and whole, ready to move forward, stronger than ever before. Derek's life began falling apart faster than he could handle. The small disruptions I had started continued to take their toll, and now the consequences became unavoidable. At work, his decisions were questioned more than ever. Projects he had managed for years suddenly ran into problems, and colleagues who had once trusted him began keeping their distance. Clients started doubting his judgment, and his reputation, built over years, was crumbling piece by piece. Even people who had considered him a friend started avoiding him. Invitations stopped coming, phone calls went unanswered, and the network he had relied on for support slowly dissolved. Derek couldn't understand why everything was falling apart so quickly. He panicked, trying to fix situations that were already out of control, but the more he tried, the worse it became. His arrogance and confidence were replaced by anxiety and fear, and every failure reminded him that he had overstepped in life and in betrayal. At home, the consequences were just as harsh. Lila had spent weeks thinking, reflecting on everything that had happened, and she finally realized she wanted nothing to do with him. The man she thought she loved now seemed selfish, weak, and incapable of being the partner she needed. She packed her things and left, calmly but firmly, leaving Derek alone in the life he had tried to claim for himself. He begged, he pleaded, he tried to explain, but nothing worked. Lila's decision was final. I stayed completely distant through all of this. I didn't call him out, didn't confront him, didn't celebrate openly. I watched silently, letting the natural consequences of his actions unfold. Each failure he faced, each friendship lost, and each opportunity slipping away felt like the justice that had been patiently building since the night of betrayal. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not a sense of malice, but a recognition that balance had been restored. Derek's downfall wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was steady, inevitable, and total. He had taken from me what he wanted, but life had a way of returning the favor. The man who had thought he could manipulate, deceive, and steal now faced the emptiness of his own choices. Friends, colleagues, and even Lila had all turned away. He had nothing left to rely on except himself, and that was exactly the consequence he deserved. Watching it unfold, I realized that revenge doesn't need to be loud or violent. True justice is quiet, precise, and complete. Derek's mistakes caught up with him naturally, and every consequence reflected the betrayal he had caused. I had stayed calm, kept my dignity, and let life itself deliver the outcome. The balance had been restored, and I could finally breathe again, knowing that the man who had hurt me most had lost everything he thought he could keep. After everything had settled, I finally began rebuilding my life. The months of pain, anger, and patience had taught me a lot about who I was and what I truly valued. I focused on my career, taking opportunities one had once ignored and putting all my energy into growing professionally. New projects, promotions, and recognition started coming my way, but this time, I wasn't chasing them out of pride or revenge. I worked with focus, determination, and a renewed sense of purpose, building a life I could be proud of on my own terms. At the same time, I repaired friendships that had drifted while I was lost in the aftermath of betrayal. I reached out to people who had always cared, reconnecting and strengthening bonds that had been neglected. It reminded me that life wasn't only about loss or revenge, it was about connection, loyalty, and the people who truly mattered. These relationships became a source of support and joy, helping me rebuild the emotional side of my life that had been broken. I also allowed myself to start opening my heart again. After Lila, I had been cautious, hesitant to trust anyone completely. But as I spent time reflecting, I realized that my capacity for love and friendship wasn't gone, it had only been clouded by pain. Slowly, I let people in again, learning to balance caution with openness. I discovered that trust could be rebuilt carefully, and that resilience comes not from avoiding pain, but from moving forward despite it. Through all of this, I felt a deep sense of balance and justice. The betrayal I had endured had been met with patience, careful strategy, and strength. I had faced the worst, survived it, and come out stronger, not hardened in anger, but wiser and more capable. I realized that real growth doesn't come from retaliation alone, it comes from building yourself into someone who cannot be shaken by deceit or betrayal. By the time I looked around at my life, I saw how far I had come. I had reclaimed my dignity, my self-respect, and my peace of mind. The man I was before, the man who had blindly trusted and been hurt, was still there, but now he was tempered with experience and strength. I had learned that life's challenges, even the deepest betrayals, could teach lessons about patience, intelligence, and emotional strength. In the quiet moments, I reflected on everything that had happened. Derek and Lila were no longer part of my story, but their actions had forced me to grow in ways I never imagined. I had taken the pain and transformed it into motivation, determination, and self-respect. I had learned that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about becoming stronger, wiser, and more capable of living fully in the present. I had risen above the betrayal, and in doing so, I had found my true strength. Looking back on everything that happened, I often think about what true friendship and love really mean. It's not about convenience, charm, or appearances. True friendship is loyalty, trust, and standing by someone even when it's hard. True love is honesty, respect, and supporting each other through life's challenges, not taking what isn't yours. I learned this the hard way, and the lesson is one I will never forget. Derek is now a shadow of the man he once was. The confidence, pride, and charm he carried for years have disappeared. Friends and colleagues no longer trust him. Opportunities that were once easy for him to grasp are gone. Even Lila has left, choosing to distance herself from someone she once thought she could rely on. His life is a reminder of the consequences of betrayal, how choices made in selfishness can change everything. I don't take joy in seeing him struggle, but I can't ignore the justice that life has quietly delivered. As for me, I've learned to carry my life forward with calm and dignity. The pain and betrayal I endured shaped me, but it did not break me. I have grown stronger, wiser, and more aware of the people I allow into my life. I have rebuilt my career, strengthened friendships, and opened my heart carefully, understanding that trust must be earned but also that love is worth taking risks for. My life is now defined by respect, patience, and resilience. Sometimes, I remember Derek and the mistakes he made. I remember Lila and the choices that hurt me deeply. But I no longer dwell on anger or regret. I understand that life has a way of balancing itself. Some people steal from you, some people betray you, but the universe has its own justice. What was taken from me has returned to me in lessons, strength, and clarity. That knowledge is far more valuable than revenge or resentment ever could be. I hope anyone listening to this story understands the power of patience, self-respect, and emotional strength. Life will test you, and sometimes the people you trust the most will let you down. But your response defines you, not their actions. Betrayal is painful, but it can also reveal your inner power. I learned that by facing the worst, staying calm, and rising above it, you can find balance, justice, and peace in ways that anger could never provide. In the end, my life is stronger because of what I endured. Derek's downfall, Lila's regret, and the betrayals I faced taught me more about myself than anything else ever could. Some people steal from you, but life has a way of returning the favor. And when it does, it's not always obvious, but it is fair. That is the lesson I carry forward, and the story I hope others remember. Patience, strength, and dignity will always outlast betrayal.